Hey, we're back. This time we're talking about Julie Stone Peters' theatricality and anti-theatricality in the Athenian law court. That's a mouthful. It's a snippet from a book that the library just got in at my request that I think might be a great source for some of you to mine. And I give you a little snippet because in part I don't want to violate her copyright too much, and I think this is a fair use just to give you this little bit. We might be doing that a lot throughout the semester. I'll have like little snippets of various sources that you then might want to delve deeper into. So come and find those. They'll either be in my office or on reserve in the library. Here we have a really interesting piece that draws parallels between ancient Athenian theater and ancient Athenian trials, which were often held in theaters. And the similarities, make sense when you think about theater as a depiction of sort of a protagonist versus an antagonist, and the audience is certainly going to have feelings about which one they're rooting for and which one they would like to see prevail at the end. So it makes sense that some of those conventions would get incorporated into early trials. One thing I want us to think about is, to what extent is that still true? To what extent does, or should our version of entertainment, and plays in theater are more than just entertainment. They can also be moving, but our version of theater, of literature in that sense, to what extent does that can or should those conventions be reflected in our legal processes? And that's really something I think that this piece brings us to. There's an interesting parallel too. James Boyd Wright refers to Aristotle's rhetoric. And Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, among his works were two that are relevant to this. One is the Poetics. By Poetics, Aristotle meant theater. And the Poetics is basically a book that sort of taxonifies and scientifically describes, what is theater, how does it work, what does it mean, how do you do it, what is and what is not poetic. And he also has a book called Rhetoric, which describes rhetorical processes, and particularly those were with respect to some sort of law and court type processes. So James Boyd Wright refers to rhetoric. I think it would be an interesting angle to kind of look at and compare some of what you see in the Poetics versus what you see in the Rhetoric as well. So we're thinking about, okay, we have, the history of Western theater and the history of Western legal processes are closely linked. Can we envision a different path that our legal processes could have taken or could take now, and should they? What would we lose? What would we gain? All of these are food for thought as we think about this reading from Julie Stone Peters. So I guess with that, I'll just leave you with the thought that when we're thinking of literary approaches to law and literature in general, I'm thinking of that, it's a golf umbrella. It's a very large umbrella. We're thinking of poetry as we conceive of it. We're thinking of fiction. We're thinking of creative nonfiction. We're thinking of theater. It basically, if it can be described as literary with a very broad brush, we'll take it. We're going to be looking at some really interesting creative nonfiction forms from Mexico and other Spanish language places called La Crónica later on this semester. So if any of that interests you, follow up with that and run it down and see where it leads. Okay. Don't like it, don't subscribe.